This is not a transition, this is a rupture. This is a sharp change in a short period of time, driven by a variety of factors. We have a determination to rise up and meet this, but we agreed a comprehensive approach within the context of USMCA, but a comprehensive approach with Mexico to deepen our bilateral trading relationships, and we are pursuing more aggressive strategies throughout Asia.
To power play, the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Free Trade Agreement, Cusma as it's known, is officially up for review. That process just started, while punishing tariffs on steel, aluminum, autos, and forestry are still there. So what's our best strategy heading into that review? Derek Burney was Canada's ambassador to the U.S. and Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. And Brian Clow was Deputy Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the lead on the Canada-U.S. file. Both are with us this evening together. Hi, thanks so much for making the time. It's great to see you both. I appreciate it.
Great to be here.
Brian, I'm going to start with you. And in particular, against the backdrop of this Cusma review, which we knew would be happening, there's a formal process, but also there's a lot of politics around it. Like, how do you think that will have an impact, or will it at all have an impact on our desire to see these sectoral tariffs, the really punishing thing, go away?
Yeah, I feel with every passing week more pessimistic about this process. Both tracks, the Canada-U.S. talks that are supposedly underway and the Cusma review that's now starting, it's clear the Trump administration feels emboldened. They feel they're winning, and I think they're going to give Canada a really hard time as this Cusma review unfolds. I think the country and the government should prepare for a long and at times painful process.
Do you think, Derek, do you have a similar instinct that Trump doesn't see any negatives right now to keeping these tariffs, in particular on the sectors I mentioned on? And do you think ultimately we're in for a long battle?
Very much with what Brian just said. We need to be very wary of entering into a negotiation with an administration that already is thrown out the one we have and violated every known principle of international trade. So this is not an easy challenge. It may be better to talk than not to talk, but you know, I don't know what progress, if any, we've made in the discussions we've had with the Americans thus far. So I'm very skeptical. I'm very wary. I don't trust this administration. I don't think anybody should.
Derek brings up a good point, Brian, about just sort of like, I think the larger question Canadians have, which is, okay, we embark on a renegotiation of Cusma, which right now, by the way, the fact that it exists is basically saving our economy, like other than the parts that have been so unfortunately and terribly hit. Like, is there any way to engage in negotiations with someone who is not a good faith partner?
Well, this is the challenge that the government is experiencing right now. It's, as I said, they think they're winning, they're emboldened, and they want to cause pain from Canada. They see it as a zero-sum game. They're trying to gain from us, and therefore, as I said, I'm pretty pessimistic about where this goes.
And let me follow up with you, because you were such a big part, and I'll ask Derek the same question, both of you big parts of the renegotiation of NAFTA, I guess, first time around, just a number of years ago. Like, was that the sense then, or did you feel like, you know, it was not exactly a zero-sum game, or perceived that way?
We were pretty nervous back then, too. I don't want to say it's that much different than it was back then. We had a president threatening to rip up NAFTA, withdraw, and he did that constantly. And we felt at certain times in those talks that he actually was going to do it. It was difficult then. It's going to be difficult now. And despite my pessimism, my advice to the government is they've got to stay strong, prepare for the long haul, try not to give ground, try to get to some sort of outcome. And the one silver lining to all of this is at least there is a process to talk to them. Dominic LeBlanc, Ambassador Hillman will be sitting down with USTR Greer and Howard Lutnick, and that's a good thing. They'll at least be talking.
We know that the last time around that I was referencing, Derek, a lot of what worked for us was this so-called Team Canada approach that was not just about dealing with the White House, right? With all different levels of government, there were people, former, current, different, you know, premiers employed to try and make that a reality. You and I have spoken before about how much less pressure there appears on Donald Trump this time around to do things that make economic sense. Have you seen any discernible difference? Do you still think that there could be any difference throughout this process if we still decided to employ that kind of approach?
Well, I'll give you one example. there are 85 senators in the U.S. who want to increase sanctions against Russia, and yet nothing is happening. Why? Because they don't want to antagonize the president. He is all-powerful. As Brian well knows, a normal trade negotiation is a balance of give and take. With this administration, it's a unilateral take. All the giving is done by the negotiating partner. That's why it's going to be difficult. If I'm encouraged by anything of late, it's that it seems that Michael Sabia has been put in charge of this negotiation. That's a good thing. He's a professional, he knows his stuff, and he's tough-minded. And that's exactly what we need. We don't need more weenies dealing with the administration. We need somebody with some backbone.
And just for everyone watching who doesn't intimately know who Michael Sabia is, he's the clerk of the Privy Council, which is kind of like the top bureaucrat here in Ottawa. He's done a number of different roles in the public and private sector. But I do take your point, not necessarily weenies, but I take your point. Brian, I also wanted to ask you about the different overall context with which this group is operating versus you, and that is that all these other countries have signed so-called agreements that agree to a base level of tariffs. I think I saw anywhere in the range from 10 to 19%. Does that continue to inform the position that Trump takes that, like, I'm winning? And ultimately, should we just confront a reality that, like, how are we going to get something much better? So
I'll answer in two parts. Yes, it makes it much more difficult for Canada than what we faced when Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland were leading the talks. Back then, the Western world, Europe, Japan, Mexico, Canada, were all somewhat aligned in the approach to the United States. They all retaliated, and they all coordinated to a certain degree to push back. And it worked to a certain degree. This time, Canada was standing alone with China in retaliation, and that's one of the reasons Trump does feel that they are winning and feels emboldened. The fact that the UK, Europe, Japan have all agreed to some level of baseline tariff does make it more challenging for Canada. But my final point is Canada needs to work really hard to avoid any sort of across-the-board tariff. It would be far worse than what we currently have, and frankly, it would undo the Cusma that we have.
Are you surprised, Derek, at the degree to which all these other countries, folded, I guess, for lack of a better term? And how do you think it will inform our negotiating position?
I was very surprised that the Europeans in particular folded without a fight. Japan, well, that's still going on, but the Europeans were a real disappointment. They had the backbone, if they had the backbone, they had the size of market that the Americans have to be concerned about, but they folded like a cheap tent.
And how do you think that impacts our negotiating position?
Well, I think as I said earlier, I think our position is very difficult. I think we have to be very cautious. We need to get relief on the tariffs on aluminum and steel and the pressures on our auto sector. If we can't get any progress on those three fundamentals, then it's not worth the candle. We've got to start segregating ourselves from the U.S. market. We can no longer rely on it. We should be doing much more in Asia. We should be doing much more with Europe, and we shouldn't let Australia steal a major contract from China from us on canola. That just doesn't make any sense to me, and I don't know why we let it happen.
Brian, what was our just jumping off the first part of what Derek said? Like, what was our primary leverage in the round of negotiations you were a part of, and how do you think that contrasts from what leverage we have now? Like, what would you identify as the leverage we have in this round?
The leverage we had then still exists now. It is the fact that the United States and many U.S. companies benefit from the trade they do with Canada. And that's still there, but very different from when I was there and when Justin Trudeau was leading these talks. Is the American business community is much quieter, therefore Congress is much quieter, and that's because, as we've seen, this U.S. president and his administration is just much more willing to punish their critics, and that's a huge difference. So it's not to say there's no leverage. Canada does have leverage. Some of those voices are there. I think they're communicating privately with the White House instead of publicly like they were before. But it's definitely different now.
Do we have any of those voices to lean on? Like, is there anybody you think will plead the case in the way that so many did in the last round?
Yeah, I think they are there, and they will act out of their own self-interest.
Right.
I read this week that John Deere laid off a whole bunch of people in Iowa because they're suffering from the tariffs. That kind of news is actually the best news for Canada and other countries in motivating the administration to try to come to some sort of resolution here.
Derek, I wanted to ask you about Mexico as well. Of course, the Prime Minister was there last week. A number of months ago, there were some comments from premiers about kind of going it alone on a bilateral basis with the United States leaving Mexico out of things. What do you think is the better strategy for Canada to pursue? Is it keeping Mexico in the fold or going it alone?
Oh, I think we should keep Mexico in the fold as long as they remain in the fold. They pulled the rug out from under us a couple of times in the past, and we shouldn't forget that. But there's no harm in speaking softly and sweetly to the Mexicans until we know what the real agenda is.
Brian, I'll give you the last word. Same question to you.
I completely agree. I chuckled seeing some of the coverage about and the reaction from Mexico about the comments made by Doug Ford,
right,
Chrysler Freeland, and others last fall. There are no angels in this. Countries act in their own interest, and as Derek said, Mexico went on their own, secretly talked to Donald Trump in the summer of 2018, and announced a bilateral deal. That put a ton of pressure on us, and it's something Donald Trump used to try to get more concessions out of Canada. So I don't judge them for that. Countries do what's in their interest, but it's definitely a good thing for us to be working constructively with Mexico.
There are no angels in this. That's what I'll leave it on. Brian Clow, Derek Burney, thank you very much to both of you. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you very much.
And your insights.